Welcome back to Family Twist. Today, Kendall and I have the pleasure of diving into an incredible conversation with Kristal Parke, Cree filmmaker and adoptee, here to discuss her powerful documentary, Because She's Adopted. This film explores the profound impact of adoption on individuals and communities, weaving through themes like the primal wound, depression, trauma, and the ways adoptees sometimes mask their pain. In this episode, Kristal opens up about the deeply emotional journey of meeting her birth mother, an experience that resonated with both Kendall and me. If you've ever grappled with identity or wondered about your roots, Kristal's story offers insight into how family connections, by blood or by bond, shape us in powerful, often unexpected ways. Kristal, thank you for joining us on Family Twist.
Thank you for having me. It's so nice to meet the both of you.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So before we talk about your documentary, Because She Was Adopted, let's tease your limited series podcast of the same name coming up very quickly.
Yeah. So it's the Because She's Adopted podcast. It's a 6-part limited series where we basically take some of the topics from the film and just turn them into a podcast, discuss the topics deeper. And if you're in Canada, you can watch it through TELUS Optic TV, but it will also be on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
Very, very cool. We were chatting just for a couple of minutes before we started rolling and mentioned that we don't always dig deep into our research before we interview someone because we feel like that might sort of taint, the natural flow of the conversation. But I was very intrigued by the documentary. And so I started watching it and got to the scene where you meet your birth mother. I'm getting chills just thinking about just that there's sort of that camcorder footage of meeting your birth mother. And then the talks of the quote unquote arrangement. And I'm you know what? I gotta turn this off. Let's just talk to Kristal. Let's get the dirt right from her.
Yes. Yeah, so the arrangement, it was something that was, when you grow up with a story that's been told to you over and over again, you just kind of accept it as part of your life and you never really think about it in any deeper of what someone just told you a story and it was part of my story. And so my adoptive mother and her sister made an arrangement that if I was a boy, then I would go to my mom's sister. And if I was a girl, then I'd go to my mom. So, when you think about it now, it's that's a little, odd, right? And it sort of played into those feelings of, oh, well, I wasn't good enough if I was a boy and I wasn't good enough for you if I was a girl. And so, now it was just an odd thing. And I never really thought about it until I was in my 30s and thought, didn't you just want a baby? But here I am.
It's funny that this came up. I don't even know if we've ever mentioned this. Probably we have, but I was really critical of my adoptive father because my adoptive mother was open to a boy or a girl. And my adoptive father just put his foot down and said, nope. And they only considered boy babies. And I just thought I told him, I said, I think that's just creepy. It's just your parents didn't have a choice when you were born. Why should you have a choice as a parent?
Yeah.
I just found that strange to this day.
Yeah. To be maybe a little bit more honest, it was my aunt and uncle. They had 2 girls, and it was my uncle, I think, that put his foot down and said, we'll only take this baby if it's a boy. And so then my aunt approached my parents and knowing that they wanted to adopt a baby. And my mom did always say to me, I didn't care what you were. But yeah, so I think it was well, if the baby's not a boy, then you can have her. I mean, it doesn't make it sound any better. It actually makes it sound a lot worse. So, yeah.
I don't know why my dad thought he couldn't be a good dad to a female because when I was a teenager, when I was 11, he married my stepmother and became instant stepdad to my stepsister. And he was a great said to her. You know what I mean? So like,
Yeah. Yeah.
was this unfounded fear? I don't know. It was just weird to me.
Do you think it had something to do with carrying on the name? Like the last name?
Maybe. And boy, would
Yeah.
he be happy that I changed my last name to Corey's, you know? Eh, oh, well, you know,
That's funny.
things happen. Yep.
Yeah, that's
But,
right.
yeah, I don't know. No, because ironically, my adopted father came from a really big family, and only he and his brother, he had two brothers. One brother didn't have sons, and then the one brother did. And honestly, I think it's down to my two cousins now to continue on the
The name.
Austin family with such a huge family. It's just kind of
Yeah.
ironic.
Yeah, 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 I hear that. My adopted parents, my adopted mom came from a family of 16, and my adopted dad came from a family of 12. So I know the big family, and I don't know about you, but we always had big gatherings and everybody kind of looked like each other. It always kind of made me feel like I don't know if I'm really a part of these people here or not. And I think it was even more illuminated because there were so many of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, we've probably interviewed close to 100 adoptees at this point, and everybody's story is different, but everybody's story is the same too,
Yeah.
in ways. And, like Kendall, it sounds like you had a, very positive upbringing with a family that was, very embracing of you, but something that adoptees, they don't necessarily think about until they're older is that primal wound that
Yeah.
exists that you just can't put your finger on because you don't get it. It's like, why am I feeling this way? Why am I feeling like an outsider? Here I'm surrounded by all this love, yet I'm not feeling a part of this.
Yeah. 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 I mean, it's, I recently showed the film in Winnipeg, and I had another adoptee. I had a number of adoptees attend, and there was a gentleman that came up to me afterwards, and he said, "I've been searching my whole life to figure out what was wrong with me, and you summed it up in one word, and that was trauma. The trauma, the separation trauma." And I related so deeply to that because it's like, yeah, I feel like there's this nagging feeling. And then of course, when I became a mother and I gave birth to my first child, I couldn't imagine even having that child in another room, than me. Like I didn't ever want to be anywhere that child was not. Now I don't feel quite the same way. They're teenagers now, so I do need a bit of a break from them. Yeah. Actually, it's probably the opposite. They're more like, "Leave me alone. We need space." Yeah. So, but yeah, the primal wound, it's a real thing. I think that, for me, I had crazy anxiety as a small child. I, suffered with, depression as I got older. And then of course I was trying to mask the pain, so turned to drugs and alcohol. And I think I have a greater understanding now of what that was all about.
It's funny. I used to our conversations have brought this to light, I think, but through the course of the podcast, but I've always downplayed how difficult it was to lose my adoptive mother at the age of 10. And I know that, because I already wondered about my pre-adoption life,
Yeah.
and what that would have looked like. And then to have lost my mom so early, I think about, no, to your point, I think it puts a lot of puzzle pieces together because people would say when I was in like middle school that I was like so fiercely independent, almost to the point of, excluding people from my life, right? Like if my fourth grade friend had lost a grandparent, I'd be like, suck it up, Bucky. You know what I mean? Like I was so
Yeah.
not in tune with what people were going through because I was in defense mode, I think,
Yeah.
constantly.
Yeah. 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 That makes sense. That makes sense. And it's painful to even go to that place of, I mean, grief is complex. And, I lost my adoptive mom during filming, and she was supposed to share her own story. She was also a birth mother. And, that loss, it jarred something in me that I will never be the same from ever, ever, ever again. And so, what's the difference between that loss and a loss that I don't maybe cognitively recognize, but I know, my being recognizes and recognized when I was born and when you were born. So but it's painful. It's painful to look at that. And yeah, for the birth mother and for the child.
Absolutely.
You've got something in the doc that I think is something we don't see very often, and it's the reunion of you and your birth mother and your adoptive parents are there. Immediately, when I watched that scene, I flashed back to the moment where we met Kendall's half brother and sister-in-law and the kids at the airport. Just that
Yeah.
that unbelievable moment. But watching that footage of your birth mother touching your face, and you can see in your face like you're recognizing somebody for the first time, and also the expressions on your adoptive parents' faces that speaks volumes.
Yeah.
And I don't know how old you were when you found out you were adopted, but clearly your adoptive parents were open to you, discovering about your history at some point.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, yeah. So I think, like I said, my adoptive parents, both of them had a child when my adopted mom was 17, and they relinquished that child. And so I think that gave my mom, she actually tried to go back when he was 2 and get him. They would allow her to visit him at the foster home, and then when she went back, I guess this final time to go visit him, she had made the decision, "Well, I'd like to adopt him now. We're ready." And he had been adopted out. And so for her, she lived with such a loss, and she wore that loss. She existed in that loss. She just carried this pain. She carried that grief, and she looked for him. She couldn't find him. So when I had, gone to my adoptive parents and said, I really want to invite my biological parents to come see me graduate. They, my mom went on the internet and somehow found my biological mother. And then she was the connection to tell, who my biological father was. And I'd always known I was adopted from the very, very beginning. It was never a secret. It was a celebration. Kristal. Yeah, same. And Kristal's adopted, right? I felt like I was almost kind of extra special because I was adopted. So yeah, so I had always known, but they found my biological mother and father. And on my 17th birthday, my mom and dad woke me up in the morning, came into my room in the morning, and told me that they'd found them. And it was a very profound moment for me. We cried together. We just were in my bed crying together, and they were comforting me. I haven't thought about that moment in a long time, but the support that they gave me, I think it really wasn't appreciated or recognized until I did this film. And I feel I still have these revelations, that wow, they were so supportive of me. So yeah, we went, that was in October of 2000, and then in February of 2001, my parents flew me out with and them to go meet her in the Winnipeg airport, and it was same. It was an incredible experience. And I don't know if you feel this, Kendall, but you have these experiences, and it's almost like it takes years for them to land inside of you, or for you to recognize what actually happened. In the moment, I almost felt detached. I was existing and being as present as I possibly could, I'm sure, in those moments, but it's years later, the effect of that, how incredible that experience really was. It's still impacts me to this day. So it was quite the meeting, and we had this beautiful weekend together, and I got to meet my half brother. We spent time together, and my birth mother's boyfriend recorded all of it for us. He was the guy behind the camera. And just recently, when we were in Manitoba, we met up with him and his family, and just as a thank you, and I said to him, you don't know, right? You don't know when you're taking a shot of something in 2001 that it's going to end up being in a film, over 20 years later, and it's going to be a piece that impacts people the way it has, so.
Yeah. Another form of support, right?
Yeah, completely. I'm sorry. I feel like I went on a huge rant there.
No, that's wonderful.
No, yeah. No, you're fine.
No, and I can so relate. I mean, Corey and I often talk about that moment when we first saw my half brother and his wife and the kids, and
Yeah.
they were cute. They were holding up, we still have them. They were holding up signs in the airport saying, "Over here, Uncle Kendall." You know what I mean? Just because I'd never
Yes.
physically seen that. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
I knew what they looked like, but it was just the most moving experience. But to your point, I've always been good at detachment, especially at the beginning, right? It's
Yeah.
that self-preservation mode. And my brother and I talked about the fact that he thought that I wasn't as happy as I really was.
Yeah.
Like, I was ecstatic, but I didn't, to your point, I didn't exactly know what to do with that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was in a shock, really.
Yeah.
And I think it was very wise what they did for us. So, they picked us up from the airport. We went and got a bite to eat. And they'd already made arrangements for us to stay in a hotel that night because they thought, we don't want to overwhelm you guys.
Yeah.
This is a lot. So
Yeah.
like, go rest, don't feel like pressure that, to stay up till 3:00 in the morning tonight, talking and all that
Yeah.
stuff. That was really great. And then pick us up in the morning. And then that was the next day. That was, the full reunion with the family. And that was the night, that Kendall and Chris stayed up till, 3:00 in the
Forever.
morning.
Yeah.
Going
Yeah.
through, photo albums and genealogy stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah. Oh boy.
Wow.
It's
was
just like,
amazing.
yeah, it's just interesting what, what triggers these memories to come back. And, it's like some days it seems like it's been a long time since we moved from California to New England. Some days it feels like it's just been a minute, but we just,
Yeah.
two of these kids that were at the airport, little kids, they're off in college now.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
bizarre.
And what was it like for you to be called, like, to see Uncle Kendall? Like, to me, that's even to be referred to as like, to be referred to as an Indigenous woman, because that wasn't something that was I was ever referred to as. But now, sort of reconnecting with my Indigenous family, and then them recognizing me as such, has been so much like a big part of me coming into my own identity as that as well, right? So
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
don't have that sort of ethnic diversion, but to your point, just having, getting to talk to my brother about our family, you know what I mean? Just
Yeah.
getting to understand, and the silly, well, we laugh about it constantly that my dad always said that his mother, my biological father, has always calls his mother Irish Indian, which he means Native American.
Yes,
And-
yes.
And we can find no connection to Native Americans. And so and now he has dementia, and so you can tell him, but it's stuck in here that is part of his DNA, which it isn't. So it's just kind of comical, and it became like a family joke, but
surprisingly, because initially, like, there wasn't a whole lot of Irish
No.
either, but he was half right because Kendall's Irish side continues to
Keeps-
grow every time we check 23andMe.
Wow.
It's a little bit stronger.
yep.
And in fact, like, his top city or top region is Cork in Ireland, which is like Kendall's visited there and it's one of his favorite places in the world.
Which I didn't, of course, even know I had that connection to when I physically loved it. I even have said to Corey, I'm like, if we ever lived in Ireland, it would have to be Cork. And this is long before I ever knew that I had that sort of connection. So I don't try to get mystic about these things, but I do love those kinds of coincidences. It's like, wow.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting because I grew up and people asked me all the time if I was Italian. They were like, "You must be Italian. You must be Italian." And I was like, "I don't think I am." Like I thought I was Native American and French. That was all kind of I knew, right? And then when I did Ancestry DNA, the first thing that I realized was that I was Italian. And one of my top matches was a guy named Dino Marino. Can you get more Italian than that?
Yeah, I love it.
We worked together for 2 years trying to figure out how we were connected, and we couldn't. I went and how you send messages to everybody on there, right? And I had asked them, "Oh, do you know this guy Bob? He's my dad, da 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 da." And he nobody knew who this guy was. And so it came to the point where Dino said to me, Kristal, it doesn't matter how we're related. The bottom line is that we're related and I love you and you're my family. That's it." And, it was then 2 years later that I got another top match, and it was actually my biological father. And so I sent Dino a message and I said, "Hey, do you know this guy named Greg?" And he said, "I know exactly who your father is. That is my sister's son."
Wow.
So him and my grandma were half siblings. And he's like, and, he called me up and we cried. And, it was just this beautiful, just to finally find out how we were connected. He's like, "I'm your great uncle and you're my niece." And yeah, it was just so great. And then we were meant to go film with him and my, as he will say, we're not Italian, we're Sicilian. There's a difference. And we were supposed to film with him in 2021 when we were doing the film, but my mom got sick and we weren't able to. And so the whole family had prepared for us to come to Winnipeg and have dinner and do this film, and they had everybody, that was going to be there. And it was a real letdown. And so we finally were able to go just 2 weeks ago, and all my Sicilian family came out to one of my screenings in Winnipeg, and I got to meet them for the first time. And it was a very emotional, meeting. And again, to just be welcomed by this family, it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming, and it's hard to sometimes accept and let it penetrate and realize that, yeah, I am a part of this family. He actually gave me this little Pandora bracelet charm that he's given the same one to a number of our Sicilian family members. And it's part of, for him, he was like, this means you're officially part of the family.
We hope you enjoyed part 1 of our conversation with Kristal Parke. Next time, we'll explore how her discovery of her Indigenous heritage transformed her life and strengthened her sense of self, creating fascinating parallels with Kendall's journey. And for a bit of suspense, you'll want to tune in to find out whether Kristal's birth mother ever found the son she gave up for adoption. Thanks for joining us on Family Twist. Catch you in part 2. The Family Twist podcast is presented by Savoir Faire Marketing Communications and produced by How the Cow Ate the Cabbage, LLC.